The end of the Cold War was a watershed moment for the geopolitical balance of power. For the first time in centuries, a single state, the United States of America, was powerful enough to exert its influence everywhere in the world. Following the demise of the Soviet Union, there was no other country capable of rivaling American power. Despite this, states like Russia, China, and Iran have always opposed America's growing influence in their respective regions. And as the United States committed several strategic blunders in Iraq and Afghanistan, and failed to exercise a stabilizing influence in war-torn countries like Syria and Libya, it suffered a significant reputational blow. Gradually, countries like Russia, China, and Iran, which opposed America's unipolarity, started becoming more vocal in their criticism of the post-Cold War international order. Today, we will examine if Russia, China, and Iran can deepen their relations and become a fully fledged alliance akin to NATO, or if their cooperation is situational. One such situation where relations can change quickly would be a conflict of nations. And what do you know, this video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations. And no, we're not saying we're sponsored by war itself, but by a free real-time grand strategy game where you compete with other players for global domination over the modern world. You take a real country into slow-paced, weeks-long games with up to 128 players, using that time to strategize in extreme detail, conduct diplomacy with the other players, develop over 250 research projects, and build over 100 advanced weapon systems like tanks, jets, and nuclear submarines. You'll also handle your economy and population, keep morale high, or use terrifying weapons of mass destruction to cripple your rivals. Since the game is always ongoing, it's great that you can check it on both PC and mobile to stay up to date on any geopolitical developments affecting your plans. Get the game via our link in the description and get an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. But that's only for the next 30 days, so act now. First, let's examine the history of relations between these countries to understand their historical context. The Russian Empire was among the powers exploiting Imperial China's decline in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Soviet Union supported Mao in the Chinese Civil War, and following the communist victory, the countries enjoyed a short period of close friendship. But after Khrushchev's secret speech, the Sino-Soviet relations gradually deteriorated, and at one point escalated to an armed conflict on the border. Watch our Cold War video on these topics. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, relations between Russia and China have been steadily improving, as their interests have aligned in many spheres. Russia and Iran have historically been rivals in the South Caucasus and the Caspian Sea region. But as Iran suffered from internal instability and turmoil, it could not contest the Russian and then Soviet dominance in the region. In the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini had no intention of being involved in the Cold War. Despite open animosity towards the United States, he saw the Soviet Union as the lesser Satan. But the collapse of the Soviet Union and the gradual anti-Western turn of Russia brought these two countries closer. Due to geographical distance, Iran and China did not have particularly notable ties throughout history. And similar to the Sino-Russian and Russo-Iranian relations, bilateral relations between Iran and China strengthened in the 21st century after China started positioning itself as a global player. This is when the bilateral relations between these countries became close and transformed into multilateral cooperation in some areas. In 1997, at the time when Russia was gradually abandoning its nascent pro-Western course and was growing unhappy with NATO expansion into its former Eastern European satellites, and at the time China was starting to contemplate transforming itself from an economic powerhouse into a geopolitical force, the nations signed a joint declaration on a multipolar world and the establishment of a new international order. There, Russia and China proclaimed their support for a new multipolar global order, based on respect for sovereignty, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, and the right of each country to choose its path of development in the light of its specific conditions and without interference from other states. With this treaty and their policies, they have implicitly and explicitly opposed the existing global order, based on Western-supported notions such as human rights transcending borders, the rule of law, and democracy. In 2001, Russia and China signed the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, underscoring a strategic partnership between them on a broad array of topics, such as economic and trade relations, cooperation in the technology sphere, and international relations. Most importantly, the treaty implied military cooperation and conduct of discussions in case of a threat against one of the states. Around the same time, Russia and China created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with Central Asian Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. At its inception, this organization was focused on security-related issues, such as counter-terrorism, fighting separatism, extremism, and drug trafficking. Since then, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has expanded to include major Asian powers like India, Pakistan, and Iran. The SCO has grown in prominence, becoming an important platform for military, economic, and energy cooperation. Since China is a massive manufacturer, it requires enormous energy resources, and Russia has them. Therefore, it was only natural for China and Russia to establish an energy partnership. In 2009, Russia and China signed a deal to build the Eastern Siberia Pacific Ocean oil pipeline, which started transporting oil to China in 2011. Furthermore, in 2014, both sides signed a 30-year gas deal worth $400 billion, which envisaged the construction of the Power of Siberia pipeline. In 2019, it started delivering gas to China. Overall, economic and trade relations between Russia and China have been steadily improving too. The trade turnover between these countries has exceeded $100 billion, as China has become the biggest trade partner of Russia. China's Belt and Road Initiative launch has played a vital role here, as Russia is one of the important transit points connecting China to European markets. Following the imposition of Western sanctions on Russia in 2014, after the unrecognized annexation of Crimea, and in 2022 after the full-fledged and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Russia has tried to avoid using dollars in their trade. Russia's removal from SWIFT in 2022 accelerated the pace of this endeavor, as Russia and China agreed to trade for Russian gas supplies in rubles and yuan. In November 2022, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak stated that the share of currencies from states considered friendly by Russia rose to 31% in the Russian foreign exchange market, with the yuan having the highest portion. Economic cooperation and membership in the same organization are all well and good, but any strategic alliance arguably cannot be possible without significant military cooperation, and Russia and China have been developing just that in recent years. In 2015, Russia started selling its Su-35 fighters and S-400 air defense systems to China. In September 2018, Russia conducted the Vostok 2018 military exercises, which included the Chinese army. Since then, the two countries have participated in joint military exercises within the framework of their bilateral relations and under the auspices of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In 2022, Russia and China carried out joint naval and ground military exercises on several occasions, both in a group with other countries and just the two of them. Even though there might have been negative moments in military cooperation between the countries, such as the Russian state defense conglomerate Rostec accusing China of theft of Russian military technologies, overall, the military partnership between these two states has been on a steady course of development. In early 2021, a senior Chinese official claimed there was no limit to Sino-Russian military cooperation. While Russia and Iran have historically had problematic relations and competed for influence in the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Caspian Sea, sanctions imposed on Russia in 2014 and the war in Syria brought them together. In 2014, the two nations signed an oil for goods deal, reportedly worth $20 billion, which envisaged Russia's purchase of up to 500,000 barrels of Iranian oil per day in exchange for Russian products. This aimed to help alleviate the pressure imposed by sanctions on the economies of both countries. Russia has also reportedly benefited from Iranian know-how in evading international sanctions, particularly after the start of the war in Ukraine in February 2022. Sanctions pushed both countries to cooperate more closely, to avoid isolation, and to boost their economies. Russo-Iranian trade turnover has modestly but steadily increased since then. reaching more than $4 billion in 2022. Political and military cooperation of Iran has been closely intertwined with the nuclear question of Iran. For a while, it hindered closer military cooperation between the two sides. For instance, one of the consequences of Iran's refusal to stop uranium enrichment was the UN-imposed ban on selling heavy weapons to Iran, which forced Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to ban sales of S-300 air defense systems, military aircraft, armored vehicles, and other military supplies. But military and diplomatic cooperation between Russia and Iran has significantly deepened recently. Particularly the war in Syria, in which both countries backed the Assad regime, can be traced as a significant turning point. Despite some difficulties related to coordination on the ground and competing economic interests in Syria, Russia and Iran closely cooperated to ensure that the Assad regime remained in power, and the American goal of ousting Bashar Assad would be defeated. By 2021, Russia, China, and Iran had carried out 3 joint naval military exercises in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman. Russo-Iranian military cooperation took off after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. With Russia struggling in Ukraine and sanctions somewhat hindering its military production at previous levels, the Kremlin turned towards Iran to negotiate weapon supply. Since September 2022, Iran has supplied thousands of Shahed and Mohajer drones to Russia, which have been used in mass strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. We do not yet know what Russia is giving in exchange, but it is rumored that Iran has been getting captured Western weapons and Russian Su-35 fighter aircraft. So far, Iran has refused to provide ballistic missiles to Russia, reportedly fearing further sanctions by the UN. Sino-Iranian relations have also developed nicely in the past decade. Even before that, China cooperated with Iran in the energy sphere, as it imports gas and oil from Iran, which helped this heavily sanctioned country survive. In 2011, it was reported that China purchased exclusive rights to several oil and gas fields in Iran. China's economic cooperation with Iran only increased following the signing of the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. In 2021, the country signed the 25-year Strategic Partnership Treaty. China has identified Iran as an alternative route for the Belt and Road project, connecting China and Europe. China has been heavily investing in Iran's infrastructure by funding the construction of Tehran's subway system, dams, and factories, while also playing a role in extracting Iranian coal, zinc, and copper. By 2022, the trade turnover between China and Iran exceeded $20 billion. So bilateral and multilateral relations between these states have been on the path of steady development. What is bringing them together? First of all, these are 3 authoritarian states, which share opposition to Western ideas of expansion of democracy and human rights trumping state sovereignty. Russia, China, and Iran have routinely condemned protests and opposition movements happening in their countries and in regions influenced by them as American and Western meddling in internal affairs, as attempts to instill an alien set of values. Regimes ruling over these 3 countries are convinced that the ultimate goal of the USA is to overthrow them and to install friendly governments through their soft power and independent NGOs, which authoritarian regimes essentially see as agents of influence of the West. Russia sees color revolutions in countries like Georgia and Ukraine as coups organized by the West, and as meddling in Russia's traditional sphere of influence. Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, has accused the US and the West of inciting unrest in Iran in connection with the ongoing protest movement in the country. China has made similar remarks concerning protests in Hong Kong. They have used similar rhetoric against internal opposition and independent media, and support each other internationally. For instance, China and Russia resisted the American attempts to discuss the suppression of protests in Iran in 2018 in the UN Security Council. China's justification of this position informs us of the theses around which all 3 countries align globally. According to China, the Security Council should not discuss the internal affairs of any country, nor is it the venue for any discussion of the human rights situation in a country. The Iranian situation does not pose any threat to international peace or security, nor is it on the agenda of the Security Council. All 3 countries share a state-centric vision of the international order, based on sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs. This includes non-interference even in mass violation of human rights. For instance, China's discriminatory policy against its Uyghur minority, which many consider genocidal, we should take such propaganda of adherence to non-interference in internal affairs with a grain of salt, as these countries do not shy away from using internal events as a pretext for interference. Russia's invasion of Ukraine under the pretext of protecting the rights of Russian-speaking people and denazification of Ukraine is the most blatant example. But still, all three countries share similar positions on their aspired international order based on sovereignty and non-interference, which is evident both in the 2016 Russia-China and the 2020 Russia-Iran declarations on promoting international law. This largely arises from opposition to the American-led world order. The values proposed by America and Western Europe are essentially based on the primacy of human rights and well-being of people over state sovereignty, which countries like Russia, China and Iran see as a tool of Western dominance, particularly American unipolarism, and interference in their perceived spheres of influence. They reject liberalism as a universal value and argue that each country has its own culture, a path of political development and values. Hence, their opposition to liberal values is closely intertwined with their desire to oppose American unipolarism and Western expansion, preserve their regimes, and continue exerting influence over their perceived spheres of influence. In 1998, when Russia started gradually withdrawing from its amicable relations with the West, the Russian Foreign Minister Evgeny Primakov proposed a strategic triangle in Eurasia between Russia, China and India. Iran later expressed its interest in joining it. Although this specific union did not come to fruition, Russia, China, Iran, and other less powerful countries opposing the existing global order, such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, North Korea, Cuba, and so on, have regularly defended each other's positions in the international arena, particularly in UN votes. These countries vote based on a myriad of strategic, ideological, and tactical reasons, but the opposition to the American-led global order is undoubtedly at the center of this. Russia opposes the expansion of NATO and the emergence of pro-Western governments in the post-Soviet regions. And both China and Iran support this position. Tehran opposes American presence in the Middle East, its role in Syria and Iraq, and is supported in this position by both China and Russia. China opposes the creation of the AUKUS in the Pacific region, and Russia and Iran support China in this. According to the Institute of Contemporary Islamic Thought director Zafar Bangash, there is a convergence of views between Tehran, Beijing and Moscow in confronting US aggression. This is beginning to take the shape of a tripartite alliance that will not only confront but expel American mischief mongers from the Eurasian region. The global balance of power has clearly shifted away from the US towards this region. These three countries are the center of the new emerging power bloc. So, we have established that these countries have significant reasons to align internationally. Their chief goal is to prevent American expansion in Eurasia and into their perceived spheres of influence. But can they really become a center of the new emerging power bloc? There are several important reasons for putting it under a question mark. First of all, Iran's nuclear program. Indeed, neither Russia nor China wants another nuclear power in Eurasia. But so far, they've been trying to find a delicate balance between preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon and maintaining cordial relations. As early as the 1990s, Russia and China expressed interest in helping Iran develop its civilian nuclear industry at the apex of American unipolarity. In 1992, Russia and Iran signed an agreement on cooperating to develop a peaceful atomic industry in Iran. In 1995, Russia pledged to build the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Under American pressure, Russia agreed to halt weapon sales to Iran. Still, it went on with constructing the power plant in Iran, unlike China, which gave up its ambitions to build several power plants in Iran, as the United States opposed this. As the Iranian nuclear program gained more international attention in the 2000s, Russia and China were part of the group of countries seeking an agreement with Iran on certain restrictions on its nuclear program. Russia and China worked in tandem remarkably well in this process. At first, they supported the resolution of the issue within the International Atomic Energy Agency rather than going to the UN Security Council. Then, China supported Russia's proposal to process uranium for Iran's nuclear industry in Russia, which Iran rejected. After that, Russia and China embraced a two-pronged strategy towards negotiations with Iran, which envisaged joining the sanctions regime against Iran while encouraging Tehran to negotiate. As the problem entered the realm of the UNSC, Russia and China cooperated to make sanctions less severe, and both condemned unilateral sanctions imposed by the USA and the EU. After the Trump administration exited the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action Agreement on Iran, China and Russia used the opportunity to deepen relations with Iran, but this did not stop the Kremlin from criticizing Iran for taking steps to enrich uranium, while also criticizing the United States for opting out of the JCPOA. There have been reports that Iran is seeking Russia's support in developing its nuclear program in exchange for drones Tehran has been sending to Russia in connection with the war in Ukraine, but it is doubtful that Russia or China would assist Iran with developing a nuclear weapon, as it would alter the balance of power in Eurasia. Russia and China are not interested in this, as they see Iran as a junior partner in their potential coalition. The Russian invasion of Ukraine also demonstrated an interesting dynamic between these countries in crisis. The war brought Russia and Iran closer together than ever before. Both countries are heavily sanctioned and share knowledge about working around sanctions to stay afloat economically. The countries exchange weapons, as mentioned previously. But even as geopolitical difficulties bring these two countries closer together, their economic interests may clash. As sanctions prevent Russia from selling oil to its usual European customers, Russia has turned east to sell its oil, which has reportedly caused Iranian oil exports to decrease. Russia and Iran may well find a way to divide markets between themselves. Still, oil exports bring crucial revenue to their struggling economies, and it may be complicated to make a deal if this becomes more of an issue in the foreseeable future. The war in Ukraine has also made Russo-Chinese relations more complicated. China is a vocal supporter of the principle of territorial integrity in international relations, as it continues to have the Taiwan problem. Despite this, they have refused to condemn Russia for the occupation and annexation of Ukrainian land, and accused the US and the expansion of NATO towards the east of being the cause of the war. But it is also notable that China chose to abstain instead of voting against the Albanian-American resolution condemning the Russian annexation of eastern Ukraine. China has refused to provide any military support to Russia. Many rumors are circulating about the current relations between Putin and Xi. It is claimed that Putin had informed Xi about his intentions to attack Ukraine before the invasion, and promised a quick victory. During the September 2022 meeting of the two leaders at the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Putin stated that Russia understood Chinese concerns concerning the war in Ukraine, and that they will offer a detailed explanation of our stand on this issue during today's meeting, even though we already talked about it earlier. Even before that, on April 1st, the Chinese Foreign Ministry official Wang Lutong made clear that China was not going to support Russia in connection with the war in Ukraine, and help them with alleviating international sanctions. We are not doing anything deliberately to circumvent the sanctions against Russia imposed by the US and the Europeans. China is not a related party to the crisis in Ukraine. It is clear that China is concerned with problems caused by Putin's war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has complicated the situation with regards to Taiwan, as it has prompted the US to increase its military support to Taiwan, demonstrating that the West has teeth and can mobilize when its strategic interests are at stake. This has arguably made China rethink any military action it was planning to conduct against Taiwan, at least in the foreseeable future. Moreover, the war in Ukraine has already resulted in billions of dollars of losses for Chinese companies due to logistics disruption. For instance, the Chinese steel and nickel giant Tsingshan Holding Group has lost $8 billion since the start of the war due to the increased price of nickel. On the other hand, Russia is selling its oil at significant discounts to China due to the oil-related sanctions imposed by the EU. The strategic partnership between Russia and China does not prevent the latter from purchasing oil for lower prices at a time when Moscow is strapped for cash. Russia is becoming increasingly dependent on China, as due to Western sanctions, its traditional European export markets are currently unavailable. China and India are the main alternatives, as these industrial powerhouses need raw materials, which Russia is ready to provide, albeit at lower prices. While China buys Russian natural resources, the West remains its chief trade partner, and China will not give that up just because these two countries share a common geopolitical foe. According to the former US State Department official, Michael Kimmage, however sympathetic it may be towards Iran and Russia, China needs the West economically. So there's a limit to how much China can afford to antagonize the US, Europe and Japan, because those are the markets that drive the Chinese economy. Additionally, Russian and Chinese interests clash as major geopolitical actors in Central Asia. Russia has dominated Central Asia ever since Tsarist Russia captured this region, maintaining close ties with the Central Asian republics through various international organizations such as the Commonwealth of Independent States and the Eurasian Economic Union, and through the military alliance called the Collective Security Treaty Organization. In January 2022, the latter organization, led by Russia, was invited by the government of Kazakhstan to quell unrest in the country. But as Russia's international standing started to wane, even in the former Soviet republics after setbacks in Ukraine, and as China's economic development gradually transformed into the emergence of geopolitical ambitions, several Central Asian countries, particularly Kazakhstan, have sought to deepen relations with China, including military cooperation. Even though at this point this has not led to any public manifestation of competition between China and Russia, it is safe to assume that there is a potential for a geopolitical rivalry over this strategically important area between these two countries. Another cause of suspicions about the potential alliance between Russia, China and Iran is the absence of an organization similar to NATO and the EU. Yes, there is BRICS, which unites Russia and China, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which now unites all these three countries, but none of them come anywhere close to the level of economic integration of the European Union, or the military integration of NATO. BRICS is a platform of economic cooperation among Brazil, Russia, Iran, China and South Africa. But due to geographic distances and political differences, the economic integration within the organization has not been at the level the member states could have hoped. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization can potentially become an Asian alternative to the Western coalition, as it unites some of the most powerful Eurasian and Asian states, like Russia, China, India, Pakistan and Iran. According to a Russia expert, Dr. David Lewis, Greater Eurasia, which SCO aims for, can turn into a powerful new geopolitical space that could pose a fundamental challenge to the US-led liberal international order. Among other activities, SCO member states also conduct joint military drills. The organization promotes the state-centric vision of international order, which Russia, China and Iran share. But can we compare this vague state-centric vision with the ideological foundation of NATO or the former socialist bloc? Arguably, no. The most successful and long-term alliances need to have an ideological foundation behind them. For the Western coalition, this is liberal democracy, respect for human rights, expansion of democracy, and free markets. The broad agreement of all members of NATO and the Western coalition in general with this ideological foundation has allowed it to expand, withstand differences within the organization, and mobilize whenever strategic interests are at stake. This was largely true for the socialist bloc too, as its Marxist ideological foundation helped it to survive until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, there have been alliances among states which did not share ideological beliefs, but had common geopolitical goals and enemies. The World War I coalitions are the perfect example. They were based on common geopolitical goals and lacked shared ideological foundations. Thus, they were short-lived and ceased their existence due to military defeat or after completing their missions. Therefore, it can be argued that a solid ideological foundation is an essential prerequisite for a stable alliance between states. At this point, China, Russia, Iran, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization do not have that. It unites enemies like India and Pakistan, countries like China and India, which regularly clash on their borders, under a vague foundation of creating a Eurasian alternative to the West. Iran is a theocracy, which seeks to export the Islamic Revolution to the rest of the Muslim countries. Russia seeks to maintain and increase its influence in the former Soviet Union, and push back NATO expansion in Western Europe. China seeks to become the chief geopolitical competitor of the US, and increase its influence in Eurasia, including in countries which Russia sees as within its sphere of influence. These interests are too different, and sometimes clash. This does not look like a winning formula for a stable and long-term interstate alliance. At this point, it looks like Russia, China and Iran will continue cooperating within the anti-American framework. They will continue supporting each other internationally. They will keep defending authoritarian regimes and protect each other from attacks on the diplomatic front. But they still have a long way to go until turning into a military alliance a la NATO. They need to develop a plausible ideological explanation for their alliance beyond vague state-centric visions to ensure that this alliance is long-term. This vision is merely a reaction to American unilateralism and Western ideological dominance. A lack of robust ideological story will be a problem for the integration and expansion of this potential alliance. Furthermore, Russia, China and Iran will have to either divide their spheres of influence or agree to the leadership of one of them. China is the most economically powerful country among them and the most plausible candidate for this. We are yet to see Russia or Iran agreeing to this. So at this point, these countries will keep cooperating and deepening their relations to oppose American unilateralism and even possibly grow into a situational and temporary alliance. But transforming into a fully fledged alliance will require solving the aforementioned fundamental issues, which Russia, China and Iran will face if they indeed intend to turn their partnership into an alliance. And thanks again to Conflict of Nations. Get the game and take over the modern world via our link in the description, aided by our exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free, but only for the next 30 days, so get in there now and fight your way to victory. We plan to release more videos on modern affairs on the Kings and Generals channel and our sister Cold War channel, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button on both to see them. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive videos. Join the ranks of patrons and YouTube members via the link in the description or by pressing the button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, join our private Discord, and much more. Please consider commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.